This is the Randomer Nintendo Podcast, episode 40 for May 21st, 2024. I am one of your hosts, Kevin. As always, to my virtual left, we have Jason.
Hello. Our show is over the hill.
Don't know what that means, but
it's something people say when you're 40. I don't know.
Wait, why are we 40?
Well, we're episode 40.
We're about to have our midlife crisis. And that voice that you just heard was to my virtual right, Angel.
That's Angel.
That is Angel.
That is Angel.
How are you guys doing?
I have a question, actually. What would you do in your midlife crisis? Oh, and Disgruntled, which was Disinterested, is back. Yep. But yeah, if our show is now...
Call out. How disrespectful.
If our show's now over the hill, supposedly, what's your midlife crisis move? What would you do? Would you buy a convertible?
I already bought my midlife crisis car.
You do have a very nice convertible Miata in red. Perfect midlife crisis color.
Yep.
What would you do, Angel, if you had a midlife crisis? Which you don't yet, but if you did.
If I did... Man, this is a super hypothetical because I don't think I would ever have a midlife crisis.
That's what they all say.
That's what they say, yeah. No one's planning a midlife crisis. It's not a crisis, it's a plan at that point.
Honestly, can't think of anything because I don't know. I don't know what would be like a big enough impulsive buy that I wouldn't already do now. Like, if that makes any sense. Like, like, buy an arcade machine or something. Like a car doesn't really seem appealing.
That's true.
I don't know. Some of these big ticket items just don't really seem like something that would catch my attention. But I don't know.
Nothing from Prime One Studios. Let's pretend everything that Prime One has done is available for you to buy. What would you buy?
I don't think it's Prime One, but there was this Naruto statue. Admittedly, like, I'm not like a super huge Naruto statue, but if I were to get a statue from an anime, it probably would be that one. And there was just this statue that had what pretty much felt like the history, or pretty much like a chronology of the whole show. Like, it had Naruto as a kid, as in his Shippuden form, his teenage years, and then also like as an adult. It was just really well done. It's like it pretty much summarizes the entire series, ignoring Boruto. And yeah, it was just so well done. Like, I almost felt like buying it. Like, and this came out like last year. Mm-hmm. But it was a couple $1,000s, and it was like if I was still watching it, I'd probably consider it and maybe get it. But that one came close. And I guess other ones were Prime One Studio did make some Ninja Turtle statues based on the 90s movie, the live action films. They were really cool. Obviously really expensive. But again, like, if I had the money at the time, or if they came out now, I don't see it being too out of the question for me to get them. Like, I guess maybe a giant T-1000, if I had to throw just something wacky out there. The Terminator statue. So, we could do that.
See, that sounds like the type of... I would go the wrong way.
The one from Comic-Con?
Yeah, I know. Yeah, that one's kind of cool. I would go the wrong way. I feel like people tend to do youthful things. I feel like for me, like, I've hit like midlife crisis when I just embrace going on a cruise and then go on a cruise. Something about cruises always rubs me the wrong way. I don't know. I like having the freedom to plan my own trip. I like being not in a petri dish at sea. I like being able to kind of, experience more than just a horizon line and occasionally a city. But if I end up going on a cruise, if I'm just like, I'm just going to turn over the keys of my trip to someone else and just off to sea I go, that's where I'm having some sort of midlife crisis where I'm realizing, I'm old now. I go on cruises. Usually you try and feel younger, but I would just embrace and just be like, screw it, I'm going on a cruise. Because honestly, there's some advantages. It's like going to Alaska and seeing glaciers and stuff, which you can't really do easily by yourself. So I would just embrace it and do the cruise, which is kind of the wrong direction,
I understand the disdain for cruises, but I still wouldn't mind going on one. Like, I understand everything that can possibly go wrong with it.
Yeah.
But it's just, why not?
I mean, I feel like if it was gifted to me, like if I was on a game show, if I was on Wheel of Fortune, they're like, you're going on a cruise because you guessed random phrase. then sure, maybe. But I wouldn't plan to go on a cruise. And my midlife crisis would be, I go, yeah, that sounds nice. That's going to be my trip. That's why I'm using my PTO tour. That's what I'm spending money on, a cruise. Like, you can hand me one. I'll do it for free. But if I'm paying, I feel old.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
That's interesting.
Yeah. I don't know where my head went with that. Like, I don't know why I was like, oh, a cruise, because it's totally the wrong direction. But, you know.
No, I mean, I feel like that's probably where people are, just taking their midlife crisis.
Yeah. And key thing, I'd be wearing those really like bright, obnoxiously bright Hawaiian shirts. I'd be drinking a drink with like big old umbrella in it. I would fully embrace the retiree lifestyle at age 42 or whatever when I have a midlife crisis. So I would go all in on it.
8 years?
Yeah, oh God. Okay. Yeah, maybe not. Oh, and I do that thing where, like, you have your sunglasses, but you have the strap so they don't fall off you at any point. Yeah, it's like, I'd have that.
Like the Oagleys?
Yep. I'd have that. What else? Teva sandals, like the ones that go all the way around your foot. Like, I wear flip-flops or sneakers. I don't really wear Tevas, but I would go full Teva. Or Teva, however you say it. Or maybe Birkenstock. I don't know. Yeah.
Birkenstocks.
Is that a shoe or is that pants?
I think that's a pants.
Well, then I wouldn't do that. I'd wear Ugg slippers on the boat.
Oh no, they're for your feet.
Okay, yeah, that's what I thought. Like, they're kind of like boat shoes, right? But like older folk boat shoes.
I don't know if I call them boat shoes. I think I associate them more with like hippie culture, but they're definitely not.
Oh, yeah,
that
I
way.
see what you mean. Okay, I take back the Birkenstocks. I keep the sunglass loopy thing that goes around my neck, and the bright fluorescent Hawaiian shirts that have like toucans and stuff, which make no sense because I'm going north to Alaska. But you know what? I don't have to make sense. Midlife crisis.
Well,
I've clearly thought about this.
I mean, best to prepare, right?
Yeah, because that's the key thing about crisis is you gotta be prepared for all crises whenever they may happen. It's like you keep the backpack in your closet here in LA. If there's an earthquake, that has all your emergency supplies. I'll just have a fluorescent Hawaiian shirt at the ready, just in case.
Yeah. So.
Yeah.
All right. Well, that's how we've been doing. Just wondering about our midlife crises that are about to happen.
Good luck
Jason?
transitioning that. Have fun being the host.
Yeah. Jason, last episode we ended on a cliffhanger regarding Nintendo because it was right before their annual financials, quarterly.
Yes, it was their full fiscal year. Which it sounds so good to say. Full fiscal year. Yeah.
Strap in, everybody.
Oh yeah. Well, it's interesting because disgruntled
George. You pissed him off.
I know, because I'm going to bring up financials. But he's going to like this, because I'm not just going to talk about Nintendo, really. I actually think we got to zoom out more than just Nintendo, because the industry is kind of a mess right now, right? Like, Nintendo's a piece of the pie here, but, like, for as much as we talk about Nintendo's financials and the games we're playing, and we, like, speculate about, like, what will the new Switch be like? Like, the elephant in the room here is that, like, the game industry is kind of at some sort of tipping point, I feel like, right? Like, there's tons of layoffs, particularly at places where, like, they were previously doing a lot of acquisition sprees, like Embracer Group and Microsoft. They've had a lot of layoffs. There's, like, major publishers all fighting for pieces of this very limited pie of playtime that's increasingly being dominated by, like, 5 or 4 live service games like Fortnite and Minecraft and Roblox. So they're all, like, fighting this intense battle where they're, like, pivoting towards making what they're calling now quadruple A or super games.
Mm-hmm.
And those require, so many more resources and so much more dev time and budget, and they never really end. Like, they can't ever, like, stop giving it resources. It just goes on forever. And then, like, in the wake of all this, even around the same time as Nintendo's financials coming out, actually, we're seeing, like, all these smaller scale titles and studios just kind of getting dropped, unceremoniously just dropped. Like, no one's interested in doing it anymore. Like, Xbox got rid of the Hi-Fi Rush developers, Tango Gameworks, as well as whatchamacallit, in Texas, the Redfall guys.
Arcane.
Man,
Arcane.
why would you do that?
Yeah, but they got rid of them. Like, Sony has, as we talked about, I think before, just straight up been like, we have no first-party IPs coming out this year, so see ya. Like, they're still putting out, like, Helldivers, but no major Sony games are coming out this year. And then the other thing that happened since we last spoke is now third parties are hopping on the same bandwagon and kind of like refocusing their energy around just these like bigger quadruple A super games. Square Enix just the other day admitted that they need to make every game of theirs multi-platform going forward, which, hey, for Nintendo fans, that's actually kind of a plus. But also B, they're reorienting away from like the smaller games that typically would make up the type of stuff they bring to Nintendo platforms. So fewer but bigger games. It's part of a strategy that Square Enix is calling. I had to write this down, make sure I got it right. Square Enix Reboots and Awakens, which is by far the most Square Enix-y title you could give a corporate business plan. But doesn't it sound like a subtitle, like a Kingdom Hearts or a Final Fantasy? Reboots and Awakens.
Oh, don't start with Kingdom Hearts right now.
It's coming to Steam, right? Didn't they just announce that?
It's coming to Steam, which, god damn it.
Is that? Are you going to replay them all? Is there? Do you have to play it on Steam to get some extra little story nugget? Like,
he might do something.
Oh man, what if they do a custom Steam Deck animation and that itself has lore?
What if just the status of you playing it in your Steam friends list?
I don't want to think about it.
As a story.
I don't want to think about it.
But I am
curious.
The store
page is going to have
the store. Yeah, you have to go into the copyright, and there's a little codec you decode, and that tells you. Yeah, no, but I do have a question before I keep going here. So, you're a big Final Fantasy guy, Kevin. Like PlayStation 5, PlayStation 4, that's where they've lived, these games. How are you feeling that, like, it sounds like they're not going to be as technically advanced if Nintendo's now one of the players involved? That means the lead platform is probably the weakest system, which is probably the Switch 2.
I don't think that they'll go that route. I think when they're talking multi-platform, they're specifically talking the big boys, specific titles. Like, I can't imagine that they're going to release the third entry in the Final Fantasy VII Remake saga on the Switch without even thinking about the other two titles.
Oh, yeah. Well, that might already be under contract. This might be post that.
Well, no, I mean, let's say it's not even under contract. I don't believe that, because the rumors for the Switch 2 right now are it's going to be as powerful as a PS4.
Yeah.
Cool.
Thereabouts.
Final Fantasy VII Rebirth was specifically made for next-gen consoles, for PS5. Like, they didn't even release it on PS4. So I don't think, especially with something like that, you can't really backtrack. Maybe with like Final Fantasy 17,
they might
sidetrack
sort of.
Yeah,
yeah.
But like, it would probably be a game by game case.
Right, that's fair. It was interesting because when's the last time Square Enix ever said this? The leading name in their list of multi-platform support was Nintendo in their announcement. I can't remember the last time Nintendo was prioritized over PlayStation by Square Enix for real supposed heavy hair stuff since like the PS1.
Well, I'm trying to think of what they've released. And I think the only thing that I can think of is like World of Final Fantasy on the Switch. And did that even release on Switch? I don't even know.
No, but they gave us a bunch of like side stuff, Theater Rhythm and the Kingdom Hearts, and which isn't really side, but
Final Fantasy game.
There's they did like a Mana game, but they're not doing the new Mana game. They did
yeah, World of Final Fantasy did come onto the Switch eventually.
Yeah, they did. That's true. They did. What else did they do? They did the exclusive. So they had like all the weirdly named ones. Bravely First, Second, Two. The one that was a sequel but not a sequel, and then Live Alive and Octopath and all that. Like they did a bunch that was on Switch, but it was all definitely like a different fidelity type of game. Yeah,
and I'm also wondering how exactly.
That.
And I'm wondering exactly how well those sold. If they're going to be...
Octopath did over 1 million. I think both...
Well, Octopath at the very least... Yeah. So Octopath 2 at least had the name of Octopath, you know?
Yeah. But that's a good question. Like, what did Live Alive do? That remake, for example, may have underperformed. So, yeah, and I wonder...
Because that was super niche.
Yeah, and them saying they're going to focus on bigger titles, which is this recurring theme in the industry, makes me wonder if stuff like Live Alive is just going to not exist anymore. Or like Theater Rhythm is just never going to get a sequel. Like, are they really going to like hone in on like these quadruple big games? And if so, like quadruple A big games, and if so, who's the lead platform at that point? Because if they're saying they want to bring it everywhere for maximum exposure because they need the highest return on their investment, et cetera, you kind of got to go with minus the third of the sevens because, they set a precedence, like you said. But for everything else, you kind of got to go with the minimum the minimum viable product and then upscale from there versus like try and downscale it, presumably. But I guess we'll see. But I immediately thought of you when I saw that they were like saying they're moving away from exclusives on consoles. So it'll be interesting to see how that changes.
Yeah, like I said, I think it's going to be a
Case by
game
case.
by game case
Yeah.
where Final Fantasy VII, I don't know, restructure or whatever that next one's going to be called.
Restructure.
Will live on
Reboots and Awakens. The name's right there in their corporate plan. Square Enix Reboots and Awakens.
I don't see a future where that'll live on Switch 2, but I can see that living on Xbox and PC day and date.
Right. That's fair.
So, like I said, it would be a game by game case.
What did spark a lot of this is the second Final Fantasy VII underperformed pretty significantly, it sounds like.
Well, yeah, because first you limit it to PS5 only, and then you also limit it to only the people that beat Final Fantasy VII Remake. So, that was always going to sell less, but it's surprising by how much less it did.
Yeah, especially in Japan, it sounded like they were really disappointed versus in the West. Yeah, so it'll be interesting. But it kind of speaks to this broader point about the industry. It's just like everything you thought would be the old way of doing things. You make an exclusive for a console, they money hat you. Great, okay, your game sells well. Like, broader point here, it just feels like we've reached, to use a term from like how people describe capitalism, it feels like we've reached like late stage console war, kind of. Like, I was listening to this interview the other day with it was Kyle Bozeman interviewing, or Bozeman, right? Kyle Bozeman? Yeah. He was interviewing Matt Piscatello, who's the game analyst from Circana, previously NPD, the guy you once DM'd, Angel, who answered you. And it was interesting that Matt was saying in this interview that he noticed in the data that the game industry is no longer centered around growth like it's been for decades. Like 2020 and 2021 were like the years that became sort of the ceiling for the industry now. And everyone who wanted to get a game and play a game and be a gamer in 2020 and 2021 was able to because they had the time because we were all locked down. They had the money because of stimulus checks for a lot of folks. It was kind of like peak, like if you want to get into games, this is your moment to get into games. And now in the time since, the industry's slowly sort of coming down from that a little. Like 2022 and 2023 saw the industry shrink a bit. And I was reading the other day that there's still 61% of Americans who apparently play games in 2023, so this past year, but that number is lower than it was previous years, a percentage point or 2 or 3. So it is kind of, things are sort of shrinking down while developers are going like, whoa, we need to broaden as best as we can, and we need to pour a ton of money into things to get the biggest result. And it's important that, like, you know, don't go high risk, go something safe, and then pour a bunch of money to it to make sure it's guaranteed. Like Call of Duty, everything. Like, you know, that's kind of the approach. And it's interesting that's all hitting ahead right now, and they're sort of shifting the industry away from smaller games because coincidentally, right now or last week is the 20th anniversary of Satoru Iwata essentially calling that this was going to happen and predicting exactly what's now happening. It was actually, funny enough, is the same period as we talked last episode with the Twilight Princess reveal. It was that E3 2004. Satoru Iwata, Nintendo's former president, for those who somehow don't know who are listening, this was the press conference where he sort of pivoted Nintendo under this vision of going away from the console arms race, away from the idea that you keep getting like bigger and more visually snazzy with your games, and towards this idea of just like catering elsewhere, catering to a different audience, the whole like blue ocean instead of red ocean. Like, it was at this E3 20 years ago last week. So like right as this was all unfolding now in the industry, but 20 years ago, on stage and in interviews, where Iwata basically laid out what we're now seeing, how there's a tipping point if your main focus is only on pure processing power and graphics and making it bigger and beefier and continuing to like scale up, how the time it takes to develop for those systems will eventually outweigh the prospects of the output. You know, it was like almost to the day, in no uncertain terms, 20 years ago, that Nintendo basically bowed out of the console war as it's defined now between Xbox and PlayStation. And those are the two, and the third parties that heavily support those, that seem to be sort of teetering into weird business decisions at the moment, or issues. And I think what's interesting is just like this many years later, like maybe he was a little ahead of his time. Like, granted, he made it sound like, oh, next generation, like PS4 and Xbox One are just going to fall off a cliff. But you know what won't? Nintendo. So he was a little ahead a bit. You know, what he predicted in 2004 seems to only really be manifesting now in 2024. But nonetheless, you look at like Nintendo and their strategy. They're still releasing roughly a game a month of varying scales. They obviously have their big AAAs. They have their small AAs. They have their B tiers. They have their ports. And all of them, so many of them sell so well. There are 67 individual million sellers on Switch just published by Nintendo themselves. 9 of them have over 20 million sold. Like, if you look at Xbox and how, and I'm not saying like Nintendo's a silver bullet here. I'm just saying it's interesting the different paths. If you look at like Xbox, they've struggled to release a game a quarter as they promised they would once do at some point. I mean, granted, credit where it's due. Hellblade, I think, comes out like 2 days from now or something. But, you know, like they're not putting out that many games. Sony, as I was saying before, has basically gone like, yeah, we got nothing first party this fiscal year at all. And to be fair to Sony too, like when they put out stuff, it does well. I think depending on the data set you look at, like 3 or 4 different PS5 games have also topped 20 million, like 9 of Nintendo's. So it's not like anyone has a bad strategy in terms of when they put out a game, does it sell well? It's just these guys are missing out on all these dozens of smaller individual million sellers they could be releasing, and they could be having some of these studios that they're shutting down maybe make those, but they're so focused on going after the big guns. Like, it really just boils down to a different strategy, I think. But, you know, as we keep watching layoffs hit pretty much the entire industry, the one company where it's not hit, they did, to be fair, they did lay off a little bit of their QA team. They moved some into full-time positions from contractors. Some were let go as projects wind down. But Nintendo's the only company I'm aware of that year over year this past year increased their employee count, not decreased. And meanwhile, you know, we're seeing stuff like Xbox and PlayStation. Not only are they decreasing, but the only real hits they've had of late, they kind of stumbled into. Like, Palworld and Helldivers 2, both are like some of the fastest selling games on their respective platforms. Helldivers 2 is actually the fastest selling Sony published game ever released, which is nuts. But they didn't really this isn't their own internal initiatives of quadruple A games that did this. This is like, well, we'll publish this other game, or, oh, we'll support this like Pokemon with guns because it's kind of a meme. And then they just like blew up on their own, and no one could have predicted that. But you gotta kind of wonder, if those were not there, what would these platforms have right now? Like, what are they barking up the wrong tree a little? Like, are they maybe at a breaking point where if you got a platform that you have to maintain, you can't promise any first party major franchises in a full year? Like, is that, I don't know. It just seems like the industry's at a really weird point. Like, have you guys given this any thought where your head's at in terms of like output? I mean, there's so much indie to play, but like in terms of the big stuff, is it bothering you at all, or even noticeable to you?
As someone that is pretty much focused on their backlog to pretty much provide their video game entertainment, it's definitely not a problem. If anything, like I've said many times before, it's a benefit for me as the angel consumer. Because, you know,
Sure,
I'd rather them have droughts right now. Like, yeah, droughts sucked when we were in the Wii U 3DS era. There was at one point where it just felt like nothing was coming out, and anything that was coming out just wasn't very exciting. But honestly, we're fine right now. I am occasionally buying some games. I mean, I'm very excited to play Trace Memory at some point, as well as Pikmin 4. I still plan on picking up the Pikmin 1 and 2 collection.
You know what's
and
interesting
Pikmin
about
3.
that, though? You know what you're mentioning? All Nintendo products. You know what you're not mentioning? Anything on the other platforms. Kind of proving the point here. You just mentioned a bunch of smaller games.
I haven't finished, Jason. I'm still...
Okay.
I'm just getting started. I mean, you gotta start with Nintendo. I mean, come on. Yeah, there really isn't anything else on PlayStation that I'm actually looking at. I mean, outside of the... And I'm just kidding. Well, I mean, we already have them. That's the thing. Like, you know, Resident Evil 4, I'm looking forward to play in 3D, which we have with the VR2. Resident Evil 7 and Village, I'm still looking forward to playing at some point. It's an interesting time for sure, but
yeah, it's interesting.
Yeah, so I guess there really isn't much of anything. Yeah, the indie scene does have to calm down because there is a lot of really cool stuff that I'm like, oh, you know, this is so many. By the time they're
carrying the game industry right now, to be honest, the indies.
Oh yeah. And by the time I realize or I even have a chance to like look at the indies, like I feel like I've already missed a whole bunch that I probably would have really loved because they're just always coming out. But
right,
yeah, just so yeah, that's pretty much it.
What about you, Kevin? How are you in everything going on? I know I've seen you tweet thoughts, but how are you feeling about just the status of how they're the games you have to play or get to play or excited to play, but aren't? I don't know. Where are you at with all this?
Well, considering that now I have to buy Kingdom Hearts again.
Now you're like, great, I don't have to buy anything else.
I mean, I can barely pace myself. I still haven't finished Persona 3 Reload. Haven't finished Final Fantasy 7 Remake. Haven't played as much Hades 2 as I want. And then, like I said, now this Kingdom Hearts goddamn compilation is coming out on Steam, and most likely it's going to be Steam Deck verified. Plus, I got really, really hardcore back into Valorant. It's like, I just can't keep up with as bad as the industry is right now with all these studio closings. I cannot keep up with the amount of releases that are out there.
It does seem like it's an interesting dichotomy you guys are describing, where it's there's so many games that came out and indies make stuff so accessible, and there's so many service games like Valorant that the gaps don't feel as noticeable as they maybe would have 5, 6, 7, 10 years ago. So a platform's able to maintain its pace off old stuff more than it used to. Versus in the Nintendo world where there's still smaller games, not really services, and they need to keep pumping them out more regularly. So that's kind of an interesting takeaway from both of you, basically saying something similar to that, like the backlog being what it is.
We're eating good right now. I mean, kind of a little tangent, but I mean, I guess speaking of the backlog, I mean, I've mentioned that I'm itching to play Resident Evil 4. That's probably one of my most anticipated backlog games. I won't even count. No, it's definitely not backlog. Well, no, I guess it is. Tales of Xillia, which I'm still playing through with Elvis right now, has been the bane of my Tales existence for almost a decade at this point.
Yeah, you've been saying you're going to play through it for
Yeah, I mean, and we are playing through it. We've been making steady progress these last couple weeks. So I'm seeing the finish line. I mean, just judging by this recap video that we had to watch just to catch up to the plot because it's been that long. There were maybe 10 minutes left in the video, which seemed to equate to 10 hours of gameplay, just based on how long each segment was. But yeah, it's an interesting thing. But yeah, I was curious, do either of you have anything in the backlog that you're excited to play or even jump into? Maybe not. I mean,
well, if you want to talk about jumping, I do want to go back and finish Mario Wonder.
Oh, you actually want to go back and finish a game? That is something.
Oh, you posed a question, what's in your backlog, expecting me to say nothing.
I expect you to say backlog. I don't have a backlog. I
just stopped playing everything.
I only look ahead or something.
We actually got to that point. We actually got a comment on our YouTube channel from the last episode where someone pointed out, I often talk about
people
how
comment?
We got a comment, and he pointed out, or she, that I often will talk about Nintendo should support their smaller games and do stuff like that, and then I just won't buy them. Last episode I'm I didn't get Another Code, I didn't get Paper Mario, I didn't get Endless Ocean, and it's a fair point, and I'm very inconsistent. But I am consistent in that whether I buy it or not, I don't finish it. I don't play it all the way through. I just like the idea of these games existing. But no, Mario Wonder is one where I definitely want to go back and finish that. And I do want to start, it's not really backlog, but I do want to start Big Kitty, or Big City, Little Kitty, Big City, whichever sequence that goes, those words, Kitty, Big City, Little, whatever. I am looking forward to trying that, which it kind of looks like Goose Game, but with a cat. And as a cat owner, I feel it is my obligation to enjoy that game. So, but those are my only two. I imagine, Kevin, you have a massive backlog by comparison, I would guess.
Oh yeah. Just insane.
What, if you had to pick one game?
I'm going through my list right now. Man, I really, really want to play Dragon Quest XI at some point.
That's one I wasn't expecting.
I've got War Groove on here too, which I
want
never
to finish
got
that too. Music is so good. But yeah.
Yeah, I just have a bunch of crap that I recently bought Dying Light 2 for whatever reason. I'm never going to play that game. I'm just never going to get to it. I just have a bunch of crap on here. Yeah.
I will say, in the face of all the industry stuff I was talking about, how well Steam handles your library and bringing it to a Steam Deck and bringing it to various computer and like PC gaming in general, like it makes it a lot easier to not get caught up in the like weeds of, well, what game's coming out this month or that sort of thing, because there's just your library goes with you everywhere. It never like runs out. Like that's something very beneficial about PC games. It's never not compatible, really. Like it's much easier to have a backlog and go back and do stuff and still feel like you're having fresh experiences than if you own like a current console, which I imagine is somewhat why Xbox is moving more towards a service than a system, because that lets them kind of mirror that kind of experience a little. So Game Pass could just be like a Netflix style, here's everything, take what you want. I don't have to necessarily put out as many games as frequently, but it's interesting. It's interesting how Steam's kind of turned the whole way people think about buying games on its head a little. And consuming games.
Okay, that's just hentai. Okay. Going through the top selling games on Steam, and it looks like number 29 or 27 is just straight up hentai.
Watch, by the time this episode goes live tomorrow, it's gonna be like number 10 or 8.
Yeah, maybe.
I do want to point out because you started this with Nintendo's financials came out, and then I like started talking about like the industry as a whole. I do want to point out there is some Nintendo stuff in there, and it does make it sound like I'm like, oh, Nintendo's got this on lock. They're not immune to this whole situation either, really. Like, I don't want to make it seem like they found such a winning formula that they never have to worry about anything. I mean, first off, the whole 20 years ago, when I talked about Red Ocean and Blue Ocean and finding that audience, like I said before, gaming hit a plateau of sorts, and anyone who wants in has an in. So it's not really like that's true for them anymore. It's more about catering like in a standout way, so people choose to spend their free time with your game instead of like you want them to play Mario Kart, not Fortnite, or you want them to play whatever, not whatever. Or if they're good, play it on your system. So there's still some element of that, but I feel like it's worth pointing out that when Nintendo did and does stray from Iwata's own thoughts about graphical updates and how he's like, don't have that be a major driver. When it ends up being a major driver, like Nintendo has seen less success. And I kind of in the back of my mind have a little inkling that like this could happen with the Switch too. Because like when the 3DS came out, I mean, they claim it's more than just this, but let's be real. It was essentially, and look at the DS with new graphics. The graphics just happened to be on the Z-axis, right? And I mean, overall, the system sold like half of what the DS did. And some of that you could attribute to early on. It had a rough start and a weak game lineup. But like that main hook of just like the graphics are now like have depth. Like that didn't, how many people left the 3D on? Like I know I did, but the fact that Nintendo put out a 2DS and it sold well.
I mean, of those 3, like, how many did it? I'm guessing 3 out of 3?
3 out of 3 did what?
Did you, Kevin?
Wait, say that again.
Like how many of us actually left the 3D on?
Oh, I turned off that sucker as soon as I got it.
See, yeah. And
so 2 out of 3, therefore, 66% of the population.
But, and remember, I also always exclusively play my mobile games with the sound off. So I'm very much a weird case there.
But you're not as much of an enigma because, like, if Nintendo, like I was trying to say, if Nintendo could put out a 2DS and a new 2DS and a 2DS XL and they all sell well enough to keep putting out different iterations, clearly 3D was not the defining thing that Nintendo pretended it was. It was a graphics thing, ultimately. And the 3DS didn't sell as well, ultimately. Or, like, obviously the Wii U, of course. That was a huge flop compared to the Wii, and there's all sorts of discussions about, well, it was the name, it was the gamepad, there's confusion about whether that's an accessory. But, like, even if you factor in the gamepad, the Wii U still required you to use Wii remotes for anyone that's not holding the gamepad. The Wii U still needed a lot of Wii accessories. Ultimately, since the gamepad clearly didn't really make a dent for anyone, the Wii U was Wii HD. It was Wii with better graphics that then had this weird accessory if you want to play some multiplayer stuff. That didn't work either. So, like, the idea of, like, take System A and make an augmented version that becomes System B, as in, like, take System A and up its graphics and you get System B, like, that doesn't, even for Nintendo, that hasn't worked as well. And in the financials that happened, Nintendo confirmed Switch successor will be announced this fiscal year, which is a very big window. And you gotta wonder just like how much of the Switch successor, which noteworthy, they're calling it successor, not like when they made the NX and it was like, oh, a whole new experience. This is a successor, so it's gonna follow that path. How much of that success, there's going to be a technical upgrade versus like a gimmick versus just an opportunity to recreate the lightning in the ball of the first. Will they get that opportunity? Like I know we've talked before about how it needs to have something besides graphics to differentiate from the original Switch, which would bring it more in line with Iwata's point all those years ago that it can't just be a technical arms race. But like we're in the 2020s, we got Steam Decks, we've got portable PC handheld things. Xbox might be coming out with one. Like, to what extent can Nintendo differentiate that? And what does that look like? And just, it's I was saying like Nintendo's got this figured out with not following graphics, but they're basically doing a graphic bump and a performance bump of the Switch 1 to make the Switch 2. And what's that look like? Because now it's in a different console war with Steam Deck and Xbox like platform handheld, or like, you know what I mean? Like it'll be interesting to see. And even that same financial briefing, Furukawa, the current Nintendo president, Shintaro Furukawa, he was noting that Nintendo too is facing longer development cycles due to more complex technology. So they're not immune to that problem either. So Nintendo seemed to recognize what was going to happen, what's now happening with the rest of the industry, but they're kind of like right behind with possibly running into these issues themselves down the line. I think the major advantage that I think they have is the fact that they're still not shying away from smaller games, whether it's in-house, whether it's other development partners. Like in the financials, they revealed that Mario vs. Donkey Kong's remake from February and Princess Peach Showtime from March, they both already sold 1 million copies. Princess Peach did it in 10 days. And Mario vs. Donkey Kong was done in-house by NST, their studio in Seattle, Nintendo Software Technologies, I think it stands for. And Princess Peach was done by Goodfeel, who does a lot. They're an outside studio, but they do a lot of these kind of B-tier games for Nintendo, like Kirby's Epic Yarn, Yoshi's Crafted World, Yoshi's Woolly World. And that whole thing, the fact that they have these other studios doing these smaller games, that actually feels like what might be the thing that keeps Nintendo kind of above water while these other companies are getting stuck in this like muck of quadruple A games and super games and stuff, because they've actually diversified their dev teams. You've got your partners like Goodfeel and Intelligent Systems with Paper Mario and Next Level Games with Luigi's Mansion. The other month I saw that Bandai Namco formally formed what they're calling, I think they called it like Studio 2 and Studio S, but basically they took the teams that used to be dedicated to Nintendo collaborations, so like Smash Bros. And as I learned when they first announced this, apparently Mario Kart and ARMS also had Bandai Namco devs on it. But yeah, they took those teams and like formally made them into a studio or two that will be dedicated to collaborating with Nintendo. Even just today, a few hours ago, Nintendo announced the acquisition of Saber Entertainment. They did the ports of Mortal Kombat 1 and Hogwarts Legacy for the Switch. And I know in the case of Mortal Kombat 1, that was actually a very well-received port, and Nintendo actually propped it up as a great example of a third-party game on Switch back when it came out. And that actually, the Saber thing is in of itself kind of interesting because Nintendo's previously worked with third parties to like co-publish or co-market games. Like you mentioned Dragon Quest, for example, Kevin. Nintendo put a huge amount of marketing and actually published some of the Dragon Quests on DS to try and prop up the series for Dragon Quest IX, which was a DS exclusive. It worked middling, but they did the same sort of strategy with Monster Hunter, and that blew up the series, and now Monster Hunter is this huge thing, in part because Nintendo put a lot of muscle behind it. So now having a studio like Saber that they bought with the explicit intent of basically extending porting services to third parties who need them, because the studio specializes in ports Nintendo consoles, and they say in the announcement that the studio will continue to do contractual ports and ports for other people and stuff. That's a very clever way to kind of augment their lineup a little. But also I think this all goes to show that Nintendo's just like, they have diversified their output in a way that I think the other companies can learn from. I mean, not even, not every release is going to be a mainline Mario, a mainline Pokemon game, a mainline Zelda. The back half of this year is going to be really interesting because we already know there's no Pokemon this year. ZA comes out 2025. Mario and Zelda just had releases. Yet Nintendo thinks they're still going to move 13.5 million Switches this year, this fiscal year. And this is a fiscal year following a fiscal year where they put out Tears of the Kingdom, the Mario movie, smaller stuff like Pikmin. They had a huge amount of momentum last year, and last year's sales were down from the year prior in terms of Switch hardware, and they're expecting to only be down about 2 million more this year than they were last year. They're expecting 13.5 million Switches. The DS at this point in its life did 2.5 million Switches. So Nintendo clearly thinks they have something big, and they do have cards they can play. First proper price cut, new bundles of hardware and games, evergreens that just keep on selling. I mean, Mario Kart somehow sold another 1.4 million copies just from January to March this year. Like, who doesn't own this? Like, I think it's something like 71% of Switch owners own this game already. It's crazy. But they're also, like, they're doing all that, but they're also promising a June Direct. And they're saying they're going to outline the second half of their year. They got to have something. If they think they could get away with selling so close to what they sold the year of Mario movie and Tears of the Kingdom, there's something coming in that Direct. I don't think it's just like a Metroid Prime 4. That alone wouldn't move that many units. Most people who care already have a Switch probably. So, like, they're augmenting it with something. And this is, I think, the benefit of a diversified lineup. You kind of get sales by 1,000 cuts, so to speak. Like, you can have a bunch of little games that do really well, and they can get you a good bottom line versus once every 2 years, if you're lucky, putting out a single big game, and that's it. Like, it's just, you know, for other industry players, they're increasingly thinking they can only do their very top IPs, that they have to do quadruple A's, they have to do super games. And I don't know, like the whole spiel when Microsoft shut down Tango Gameworks and Arcane Austin, like they kept saying, oh, we need to orient around bigger games. And then like the next day, they kind of in a weird paradox said, well, actually, we need smaller ones too. And everyone's like, but you just closed the studio that made an award-winning smaller one. But what's that about? And yeah, I just don't. I think the other developers just, or the other companies just don't know. Like, actions speak louder than words. They're saying they want small games. They, as platform holders, need to have a stay release of games. They need to, or else why would people buy into your system? How, if you're like Microsoft, do you sort of address that when you close a studio while simultaneously saying you do need that studio? How, if you're Sony and Square Enix says, you know what, maybe we're not going to do a lot more exclusives anymore? How do you, you know, augment the fact that those games aren't in your lineup going forward if you don't have 8 games ready at all this year? Like, there's just a lot of weirdness right now. And I think ultimately, regardless of your strategy, I think the key thing is, because you touched on it, Kevin, one of the other points Iwata made, put value in your developers. Like, and I realize I'm not like saying anything truly groundbreaking, but like Iwata once made a point that layoffs will not result in your best products because developers are scared. They don't know if they're going to have their livelihood. They're going to be distracted from being as creative as they can. And, you know, even if, like, let's say Xbox does want smaller games, where are those ideas coming from? They let go of the Tango Gameworks team when they were pitching Hi-Fi Rush 2. They let go of the Arkham Austin team when they were pitching a new single-player, like, Dishonored type of game. Both studios, the reason was, well, they're not making anything currently. It's like, right, because they just finished a game and they're pitching you the next game. Like, you need to give them a chance. And, like, you know, what's going to happen when Hellblade comes out? There's like this half joke going around the internet of like, well, if the game underperforms, Ninja Fury's going to get shut down. And it's like, if you're a dev finishing up a game, why would you ever want to finish the game? Why would you put the effort in? Just drag it out as long as you can. Keep your job. That's not going to make a good game, but it's going to keep you employed. So it's just like, you know, it's just such a mess right now. Like, it feels very backwards. And the fact that, you know, I get that Microsoft and Sony in particular games are part of a bigger company, and the execs that oversee the whole company, you know, kind of look at them as a product in the same way that, like, at Microsoft they may look at Windows apps or like something like Office, or at Sony they probably look at a game and they see it like a film where it's like you have this star that you can put in other things. So you have like, oh yeah, Last of Us is huge. We can make it a show and a movie, and, you know, or Twisted Metal or whatever. So I kind of get that they're viewing it not just strictly as like games are this self-contained thing that needs to have like a creative force behind them. But final thought on Iwata, 20 years ago till now, you know, back when Nintendo was struggling, he took a pay cut, a big one, just to ensure that the developers wouldn't, just to ensure the game output would stay strong, just to ensure that people would still enjoy the games to their maximum potential because they'd be good. And I feel like, you know, that's the right move here, not cutting off your developers when they have successes, like the Tango Gameworks guys. And I don't know, I guess if nothing else, I just want people to value their developers. Because I think without them and their talent and their ideas, the industry seems like it's on the cusp of like a major sea change that could cause it to fall apart. And if that happens, we're either going to not have a game industry anymore, or we're all going to be, you know, exclusively playing first-party Nintendo games of various sizes and some cool indies. One of the two is going to pan out, but I'm hoping for everyone involved it's the one that means more games on more platforms. But it's a weird time, and that's my soapbox for today. But I don't know. It's just been thinking a lot about this last few weeks because it's been so weird how it's kind of unfolded as rapidly as it has, and I suspect the layoffs are not done or anywhere near done. I'm going to assume that's applauding me and not the layouts.
No, yeah,
Anyway,
it's all the information you just provided everybody. That was great,
Thank you.
Jason.
Yes, that's my time. That's my time. Thank you.
Yeah, wow.
They probably flashed a wrap-up light like 20 minutes ago, and I'm sure disgruntled George has already left the building, but you know what? I got a lot of little factoids squeezed in there, so.
That you did.
Yeah.
Angel, how do you feel about all these layoffs happening?
Bad. I don't really know.
I don't mean to laugh at you saying bad. I'm just laughing at like here's Jason for half an hour, and then Angel's one-word answer.
I don't really think there's anything else that good bad is. It's just unfortunate. It's not just the game industry, but just entertainment industry in general. It just sucks that a successful game doesn't necessarily mean like security anymore. So it's, I don't know. It may as well be a deterrent from major studios where games are just getting more and more expensive every year. And if anything, in a weird way, indies seem like they could be safer, at least more secure. But
indies,
but there's also
are interesting.
The fact that they're competing with so many things that they could easily get lost in the shuffle as well. So
yeah, for indies, I feel like for every Animal Well or for every, I don't know what's some other ones.
Animal Well. Definitely interesting because the whole donkey thing. I feel like if it wasn't for him, and
it wouldn't have attention.
Mode,
for every Amwell, for every Devolver digital published game where they put their marketing muscle behind it, for every one of those, there's probably a dozen or two of indies that never break even, and it's just a losing proposition. Like nothing feels sustainable right now in gaming, except kind of Nintendo, and they're on the cusp, as I was saying, depending on how Switch 2 shakes out. So it's weird.
Would you guys be fine with it just being called Switch 2?
I saw some dumb rumor. It was, no offense to the rumor stars, but it was going to be called Switch Attach. And I'm like, that doesn't even roll off the tongue. I don't think I would be cool with them calling it Switch 2. I think realistically, if they keep it that much of a Switch name, they might do a nod and do like Super Switch or like something, Switch Advance or like some reference to a different Nintendo legacy expansion of a platform or something. But I don't know what that would look like.
Switch Attach.
Yeah, I don't even know. Like, I guess the rumor was like, oh, like the Joy-Cons can but I mean the Joy-Cons currently attached, so I don't know. It's a bad name.
Yeah,
but I'd be okay with Switch 2.
Bad.
Yeah, I could see them totally. Oh, no, I can't.
Maybe it's attached to you because they have to get it surgically attached.
Oh. If that would be my midlife crisis, actually. If Nintendo is like, we can implant something in your skin or brain, I would do it.
The only thing that they can implant is Virtual Boy. Do you do it?
Yes.
Oof.
Oh, that's huge, though. Where would I implant it without looking weird? Is it
your vision is just the Virtual Boy.
My vision
graphics.
just becomes black and red.
Yeah, there's no additional.
Oh, you know what? You know what? I would not do that. Actually, come to think of it, because that would get really frustrating.
Really? Because it sounds like you took the more inconvenient route and are dropping the last one. Oh.
I would.
Teach their own. You do you.
I don't think I would. Yeah, I don't think I could do the Virtual Boy as my as my vision going forward. I like color.
Color is pretty neat.
Color is pretty neat.
Yeah.
Well, I think we found our title.
I think we found our episode title. Color is pretty neat. Kevin, how you feel about all the layoffs and stuff?
It's upsetting. It sucks. Tango Gameworks, especially, is the one that I think hit everybody hard, especially off the heels of Hi-Fi Rush, which that's another one that I would love to get to, but just don't have the time for.
So I want that on Switch.
It was really odd. What is it? Ninja Theory? No,
yeah,
not
Ninja Theory. The Hellblade people? Ninja Theory. Yeah.
Are you sure? Is it Ninja Theory?
Almost positive. Like 85% positive.
Oh, I get them confused with Team Ninja, which is...
Yeah, I used to too, and that's why I was so confident it wasn't, because I remembered it's not Team Ninja. Yeah.
The head of Ninja Theory released a statement on the launch, and something about it felt really honest. They know that they're on the chopping block.
Which is so crazy, because Microsoft's been investing so much. How is Ninja Theory on the chopping block, but the people making Perfect Dark that haven't made progress in 5 years, and everything I've heard about the game is that it's still a complete, non-starter. How's that still going? Like how it doesn't make, and no offense to the people working on Perfect Dark. I know for the individuals involved, it's probably both an exciting but grueling process. I get that. I just mean like if you
called the industry or something like
that. Something like that. And they're in Santa Monica. They're right near here. But I don't mean to insult them, but just like how do you have a game that hasn't gotten past pre-production for 4 or 5 years? And meanwhile, the guys who made your award-winning Hi-Fi Rush are like, here's what we want to do for the sequel. And you're like, nope, we're going to keep investing in the money black hole of Perfect Dark. Or like, we're going to, cut the Hellblade guys loose to invest more money into Perfect Dark. Like, it just doesn't make sense.
The Initiative is
the
guys, the team working behind.
Who is now getting assistance from Crystal Dynamics because the game was off to such a shaky start. They had to bring in other developers from another company.
Interesting.
It's like when Retro took back Metroid Prime 4, kind of.
Yeah. Interesting.
Yeah.
Okay, well.
But yeah, the whole thing's just like, it sucks because it's such a fun industry in terms of like what it produces, and yet it sounds so like daunting and grueling what you have to go through just to be able to work in it.
Yeah.
It's a weird juxtaposition.
Yeah. Speaking of daunting and grueling.
Oh, yes. Go on.
I saw a movie today by the name of Late Night with the Devil. Have you guys heard about this movie at all?
I've heard of something called Interview with the Devil, but not.
I put it wrong on the docket.
The most I've heard is there are some posters in the movie that apparently were AI generated.
Yeah, and I'm not going to touch on that. Like
that's all I know, though.
It sucks, but I'm not an artist, so I can't critique it the same way that artists and people in the industry can. So
you're not Scarlett Johansson being like, OpenAI, don't use my voice. Yeah. Did you see that, by the way? That's a crazy story. But anyway.
It's not that crazy. It's just more like they just used her likeness without permission.
Well, no. Did you hear the new wrinkle? So, yes, they used her likeness without permission.
Yeah, the new wrinkle was they asked her before and they said no.
And she's like, no, thank you. And they just did it anyway.
It's not that crazy. It's just they're just being dicks about it.
Yeah, I guess so. It just seemed kind of absurd that they didn't think about the legal repercussions of that. But
yeah.
Anyway, Late Night with the Devil.
Late Night with the Devil. Yeah. So the premise of the movie is you have this late night talk show host, Jack Delroy, who's played by David, and I'm going to butcher his last name, David Desmalchian?
Is he the one with kind of a long face?
He's Polka Dot Man from the Suicide Squad.
Okay, yep.
And he was in...
kind of has a long face.
Yeah, he was in... What else? He was in the first 2 Ant-Man movies. He's in your favorite movie, The Dark Knight.
That's where I recognize him from.
Mm-hmm. The guy who is it? I think Harvey Dent takes him into like the alleyway.
I think. The one I always was like, oh, who's in that movie is Cillian Murphy when he's in the Batman Begins as well, but he has a brief moment in Dark Knight at the beginning. I'm like, oh, it's that guy in every movie I've seen since, including when he's become like recognizable by name, like with Oppenheimer. I'm still like the guy from the beginning of Dark Knight and all of Batman Begins. Yeah.
Cillian Murphy will always be, or Killian Murphy will always be.
Killian. Thank you. Yeah.
Joe, crap, I forgot. I forget from 28 Days Later.
See, I've never seen 28 Days Later, so I just know him as Scarecrow. That's who I was thinking of in Batman Scarecrow. There we go.
Anyways, Late Night with the Devil, late night talk show host Jack Delroy, and his ratings are tanking. So during the Halloween episode in 1977, he decides to bring on a girl who is supposedly possessed by a demon to get a ratings bump. And so the movie is framed as a documentary. The first 10 minutes, or the first 5 to 10 minutes, starts by delving into his backstory, like how he started hosting back in 1972, and then how he went through some hardships in his personal life, how he has just never made it to Johnny Carson's level, because I think Johnny Carson was in the 70s. You might know more than...
Yep. Yeah. He went from the late 60s up through the late 80s, I believe. That's not right. 70s and 80s. Yeah. Yes, it would be Carson.
Yeah, so how he's just never gotten Carson numbers, and so this is one of his last ditch attempts to hit it big, because it's Sweets Week. So everybody's looking at his numbers. It's actually really interesting how they present the TV, the recording aspect of it. where it feels like you are watching an episode of this old late night TV show, and then whenever they do go to commercials, they sort of splice in what is set to be never before seen footage of this fateful night, because this night was the last episode that they recorded for this show, for this late night show, which is called Night Owls with Jack Delroy or Joe Delroy, Jack Delroy, yeah. So that's essentially the premise. David Dastmalchian, he's really, really good in this performance. He's got that like Johnny Carson vibe that late night talk shows hosts had back in the day. And you know, he also has his own Guillermo, his own Andy Richter, Gus, who is like a really, really delightful character in this. He provides a lot of the comedic relief the same way that, you know, Guillermo or Andy Richter would.
Right. Or Ed Helms, or not Ed Helms. Oh God, Ed McMahon. If you want to go back to Carson, yeah,
sure.
Yeah, that sounds like a name.
And then like the set design has like that old late night show feel, which actually reminded me a lot of Robert De Niro's character in Joker. Remember how he was also like a late night talk show host?
Yeah.
So,
the whole
like,
everything about this movie aesthetically reminds me of that scene in Joker. Yeah.
So like aesthetically, yeah, it's got the perfect look. A lot of beiges, a lot of like muted colors. Like everything about the production to the aesthetic to the feel is like, it's really well done. But man, the overall execution just didn't do it for me.
That's a bummer.
I was really excited for this movie, and I just felt that it was okay. A lot of that has to do with the pacing. It's a 90-minute movie, and man, does it fly by so quickly. It's also like not a particularly scary movie. Like there are some tense moments in there for sure, including what I thought was like the most tense moment that involved Delroy's sidekick Gus, but that comes a little too late into the movie, because right after that we get like another set piece and movie's over, and it took me by surprise, like quite honestly.
Like it felt like it just like abruptly ended, or
I don't know how to explain this without spoilers. It doesn't necessarily abruptly end. It's just the end comes way too quick.
I see. Okay. Yeah.
And then like something else that was bothering me the entire time during the movie was at the very beginning when they show you these first like 5 to 10 minutes of Jack Delroy's life and like everything that led to this night. It's voiceovered by Michael Ironside. There's clearly a piece of information in there that's a Chekhov's gun, and the entire time as I'm watching this movie, I'm like, when is that aspect going to come in? When is that aspect coming in? And sure enough, at the end of the movie, they brought it in. Because it's such a strange little piece of information that they give you. And it's sort of, without spoiling exactly what it is, it's like they show like, oh, Jack Delroy, you know, he's loved by America. You know, he's got a loving wife. He's funny, he's charming, blah, blah, blah. Also, he does this one really weird, super weird thing. And then they just move on to the next point of like how he's a very successful talent. And it's like, all right, clearly that very, very weird thing that he does is going to come back. And sure enough, it does.
That's a little too on the nose by the team at the movie there.
Yeah,
it sounds like.
Yeah. I was just really disappointed. It's a fine movie, but I just wish it was more. Especially like this has like a 97 on Rotten Tomatoes with like a 7 point something as the rating.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I just it's such a very interesting premise, and apparently this has been done before a couple of times. Yeah, 97% of 230 critics reviews are positive with an average rating of 7.9. Yeah, so like this should be within my wheelhouse, you know, but
for sure, yeah.
Yeah, like it's a fine watch, like maybe with a couple of buddies, you know, having a drink or two, like It's a fine movie. Like I'd even recommend it to you, Jason. I know you don't like horror movies, but I think something about the aesthetic.
Yeah, I was gonna say the aesthetic and the theme of it seems on point for
Like
me.
it's a really interesting premise, but it's just it's maybe I haven't been doing a great job of being like, yeah, you should see this movie because
You're like it's kind of not great, but Jason, spend some time with it.
like I said, I
think I would appreciate like
everything about the movie is well done.
Yeah,
the atmosphere, like I said, the aesthetics, the feel is like really, really good. And sure, there are some things in this movie that it's like, okay, this is not shot like Late Night with Johnny Carson. This is shot like Jimmy Kimmel Live, you know?
Sure, yeah. The fact
but
that you're
still,
able to observe that as not a late night aficionado in the same way I am is notable.
like clearly this is inspired more by. Well, the aesthetic is obviously inspired by like Late Night with Johnny Carson, but the actual filming of that show is clearly like
modern.
Is a very modern feel, you know. And that honestly didn't bother me. Like, I understand it's an indie movie. I think it was made with only like a few $1 million. But yeah, just wish that it was a little bit more.
You know, speaking of throwbacks to old school late night, did either of you guys watch any of Everybody's in LA with John Mulaney on Netflix in the past?
I only saw clips on Instagram that John Mulaney would post himself.
So first of all, if you watch the first episode and you brighten the screen, I'm in the crowd. I should get free tickets. But yeah, it's an interesting...
But you're going to give us reasons to watch it.
No, I'm getting there. It's an interesting... It's sort of an off-kilter... So basically the premise is Netflix had this comedy festival here in LA, for those unaware. It was about 12 days long. Every comedian you could possibly imagine was at every venue you could possibly name. Like it was like you'd be driving down Sunset or you'd be driving down through downtown and like billboard after marquee would just be Netflix. It felt like the world, like it felt like LA was a dystopian future and the corporate overlord was Netflix. Like they were everywhere. It was insane. But because all these comedians were in town, John Mulaney did essentially a half send up, half off-kilter riff on a traditional late-night show, with the idea being let's get as many of these comedians into this late-night show as possible and really dissect why is LA so weird, essentially. So, like, each night they'd have a different theme. The coyotes that roam LA, the palm trees that aren't native here, the earthquakes, the future of the city. That one's kind of interesting because they sort of like they brought in someone from the tar pit to like explain kind of the history of LA, and then they sort of pivoted that into the future. But they had this sort of like overarching theme of like, we're going to talk about palm trees today, and they'd bring on like a real expert about palm trees. And like, did you know, for example, most of the palm trees in LA are dying. They last about 100 years, and now there's a serious question of, do they plant more palm trees which don't provide shade, or do they plant more real normal trees that do provide shade and can cool down the city? And like that seems boring, but he takes these like experts and then just throws in some comedians and just has them sit on the same couch and kind of like have this weird, awkward conversation about palm trees or whatever. And it's just like he just bring in an assortment of comedians. I mean, it was like David Letterman, Bill Hader, Jerry Seinfeld. The one I went to was Seinfeld, Will Ferrell as a surprise guest. Who else? A few others. But like big name, like stars, and then just like people that are like stand-ups, and it'd just be like this weirdly... They'd just be on the couch talking about things, and they take call-ins from real people in LA, and they just kind of like awkwardly like let people talk about palm trees or about coyotes, and then they just hang up on them. But every time he hung up on them, he'd always ask them what their car is. Do they drive? What car do they drive? Because it's LA, car culture. And it was just like this very weird... I don't know how to describe it. It felt like if Eric... You know how like Eric Andre, the whole premise of his show is basically making fun of like the late night TV format and just going as like insane as you can with like how do you like catch people off guard in this traditional format. It had like Mulaney's had kind of that off kilter, but if it was toned down for more of a general audience, but was still kind of weird. Like the whole thing felt like kind of... They didn't quite ever find a groove. but they kind of found a groove. There's some episodes that are pretty funny. There's some that like because the dynamic of like the specialists with like the comedians worked really well. There's some where it didn't. Like the mayor of LA called into one. They had one of those little delivery robots as like a recurring character on the show. They had like Richard Kind be the announcer for the show. Like it was just like this very strange hodgepodge, but it was kind of fascinating to watch. And I really enjoyed the 5-6 total episodes they did. 6 they'll ever do. He says not, they're going to do 6 and they're done. Even though it was not necessarily it was very kind of, you know what it was actually? It was weird, like panelist discussion combined with like mid-90s Late Night with Conan O'Brien sort of left brain bits and humor. That's probably the best way to sum it up. But it's definitely an experience. And I had fun at the taping, but it's definitely an experience if you are kind of into like the late night format and want to see people sort of toy with it or riff with it in a different way than Eric Andre, in a different way than the movie you're just describing. Like this is just kind of a third perspective on how you can kind of poke at and do weird stuff with a format. So, but I enjoyed it. I watched all 6 happily, but it was definitely a weird show.
Nice.
Yeah.
Speaking of weird shows, I heard this Knuckles show is pretty weird too.
Oh man, this is a Jason heavy episode. Yeah, it is kind of weird. So I'm not going to spoil too much because I know Angel and Elvis have yet to see it and they want to watch it. But I did watch it the weekend it came out, which was a few weekends ago. You know the weirdest thing? Okay, I'm going to give one spoiler. Sorry, Angel. I'm telling you now. As a Jewish man, boy, was I surprised and entertained by the entirely Jewish third episode where Knuckles goes to Shabbat dinner. And then they have a fight scene around the dinner table, set to Hava Nagila. Not making this up. Really happened. Real thing. But yeah, no, the Knuckles show is interesting. I did enjoy it. It took a little slow to get going. So there's, it's a mini series. I think it's also 6 episodes. You know, John Mulaney and Knuckles have tons in common. It's just being one of many things. Yeah, it's basically, I would say if you like the Sonic movies, this does fit in well in terms of vibe. The premise is basically that, Knuckles is, grounded because he's not really doing what he's supposed to be doing to be a good tenant of wherever he's living. Wherever Sonic and Tails live, I forgot her name, James Martin's girlfriend's house. He's kind of being a pain. She's like, you're grounded. But then Wade, the cop sidekick from the movies, wants to go find his dad, who left him when he was a kid. And his dad's a famous bowler because, sure. And then Knuckles sees an opportunity because the reason Knuckles was grounded is he kept trying to train and be the ultimate like warrior, essentially. He saw an opportunity to take Wade under his wing and have Wade earn the honor of being the best in his choice of combat, which is bowling, and meet and reunite his dad. So then Knuckles and Wade basically go on a road trip to go meet Wade's dad, and yeah. So the first couple episodes are fine. It was actually weirdly the Shabbat dinner episode that kind of got me like, okay, sure. And then from there, there's some other stuff that I won't say too much about. One thing it does well, it's not really a spoiler. They do in the same way that the Sonic games do a really good job of integrating original music, whether or not you like the music, they integrate it very thoroughly. This also integrates things quite well in the musical sense, and that is all I will say. But, yeah, it was interesting because I feel like the show is more in line with the first Sonic movie than the second. So like the first Sonic movie was like a road trip CG animal buddy comedy thing, and the CG animal just happened to be Sonic, and they just happened to have some video game references, right? And then the second movie, I remember coming out of that feeling like, oh, they basically made a movie of the video game. Like it went to like the insane lengths, it went to the kind of like ridiculous, like it was over the top, like it felt more like the games. Well, the first one felt like a fish out of water, Sonic on Earth story. I would say Knuckles is more in the vein of Sonic 1, where it's kind of fish out of water, Knuckles experiencing these new things with game references sprinkled throughout. Not as many as Sonic 2, not as deeply entrenched in the story as Sonic 2. There's some good ones, like at the beginning, he's going to like a training obstacle course that straight up looks like a Sonic level. There's some other ones that make pretty blatant references to Sonic. They have more like smaller ones, like, oh, they go to a ski lodge. It's called the Snowcap Lodge. Oh, like the level. Apparently the whole, and this isn't a spoiler because it's in all the posters, the Reno set piece where the bowling thing happens, they claim, well, we picked Reno because casinos, the casino zone is kind of a nod to that, which, like, yeah, I guess if you sort of squint your eyes and tilt your head sideways, you could say it's related. But it definitely is more of a buddy road trip thing with a CG animal that is a video game show, but it does it well. And it's entertaining, and the references, got a smile out of me. And I'm telling you, episode 3 and 4, between the Shabbat dinner and what happened in the next episode, that's when I was like, okay, there's something here. This is kind of fun. And then weirdly, when they get to Reno, again, not trying to spoil anything, but it kind of dips its toe into like the vibe of like the Will Ferrell sports movies where he's like, or like Dodgeball, like that era of movies where it's like Talladega Nights, Dodgeball is just kind of this over the top, but also super sort of taking itself like this is a real thing. Like they even have ESPN 8, like the Ocho, like that's in this randomly. So like there's a lot of nods to that kind of subgenre of comedy from the mid 2000s in the very back third of the show. But yeah, overall it's fun. It's weird. It's not as video gamey like it says Sonic 2. But if you like Sonic 1, this slots right in terms of the vibe and the humor, and there's some fun winks and nods to game fans, just not as many as I kind of hoped there would be. But yeah, I think that's kind of my cliff notes of it. But it's worth checking out if you like the games. You'll appreciate, the character. And and Idris Elba does a great job. Like he's great as Knuckles, as he was in Sonic 2. So yeah, that's Knuckles.
That is Knuckles, and unless we have anything else, I think that might do this episode.
Angel, how are you? You've been very quiet.
Yeah, I guess that's pretty much everything for the episode.
Okay. Am I talking again? Am I now doing the outro?
Yes, you
Oh,
are.
man. This is the Jason hour. Okay. And George loves it. Okay. Well, you can find us on all the podcasting services, which I recommend you do because there's a lot of cool stuff coming up in June. Like when we come back, I don't know if it's the week we're back or the week after, but we got like E3 that isn't. There's Summer Game Fest. There's a bunch of other stuff. Apple's doing their big WWDC, I think, by the time of our next episode. So there's going to be, and there's supposedly a lot of AI stuff coming to iOS. So there's going to be a lot of interesting things to talk about and explore. So, plus whatever we're watching. So to make sure you don't miss it, you can follow us on all the podcast apps, like I was starting to say. We're on Apple Podcasts. We're on Google Podcasts. We're on Spotify. We're on iHeartRadio. We're on Pandora. We're on Amazon Music. We're on YouTube, @RAM_Nintendo. We're on Twitter, @RAM_Nintendo. We're individually on Twitter. I'm @JSR7. Kevin is @KVNGomi. And Angel's over on Instagram @World of Weros. Also, I'm @JSR7 on Threads. But it's the same content as Twitter, so just take your pick. But yeah, I think that's about it. So I'm going to go back to you guys now, and I think I'm going to be quiet the rest of the episode.
Awesome. And with that, since he didn't say much else this entire episode, Angel, take us out.
Guess I'm gonna go watch Knuckles.